His first question in this sphere is, why is she out walking around when I was locked up in a room for 20 years?
She is perhaps the most hated stepmom in America for what she allegedly did to her stepson for 2 decades. Now, she's pleading not guilty. Her defense attorney says everyone is rushing to a conclusion.
I understand that the whole world wants to convict Ms. Sullivan, and the whole world already has. But this is the only place, the only room in this country where we have an opportunity to protect her rights.
The new details we just learned in court about the 32-year-old man Kimberly Sullivan allegedly held captive inside her home for 20 years, who weighed less than 70 pounds when he was rescued by firefighters. We're on the case presented by Law & Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Today in court, a Connecticut judge said that the allegations against Kimberly Sullivan are the most troubling he has seen in his career, and they allege an unthinkable lack of empathy. There has been a lot of outrage over Sullivan being free since her bond hearing on March 13th after she posted a $300,000 bond. Today, she was in court as the state of Connecticut tried to add conditions to her release like GPS monitoring and house arrest. The allegations that Sullivan is facing, they are gruesome, they are sad, and frankly, they're hard to believe. The story begins on February 17th when Sullivan called 911 for a fire inside her Waterbury, Connecticut home.
Oh my God. 911, it's 2 Blake Street.
What's the address?
Please hurry, it's 2 Blake Street. There's a fire.
Okay.
Oh my God, there's a fire outside.
Ma'am, what's
2 Blake
fire?
Street. The TV, I don't know, my son, a stepson is in his room, and I don't know, he did something with the TV. I was sleeping, I fell asleep.
See flames or smoke?
Yes, come on, Steph, come on.
Okay, can you get...
Yes, we need an ambulance, please.
Okay.
Please, we need an ambulance.
Ma'am, all right, you said something's on fire and now you need an ambulance. What's going on there?
Yes, his room, the TV in his room.
Okay, did he get injured? Is he on fire?
Yes, he's injured. Please send the ambulance.
Ma'am, I'm going to send the ambulance. I need to know what's going on and why they're going out there. Where is he injured?
I don't know. He's kind of, I don't know. He's kind of passed out. He's out of it. Please.
Okay, what's your phone number just in case we need to give you a call back?
Please.
Okay, is the fire out, ma'am?
No, it's not. Please. I'm trying to.
I understand, ma'am. I'm trying to get information on what's going on there.
Oh my God, it's like all the power in the house is out. I don't know if it blew a fuse.
Okay, ma'am, just get out of the house, okay?
When firefighters arrived, they found Sullivan outside.
Come on, come down.
Come on down.
Who else is in the house? Who else is in here?
My stepson is in here.
How many other people? Listen,
That's it. I have 2 cats.
Everybody's out?
Yes.
But your stepson's still inside?
Yeah, he's right here.
Okay,
yes.
come out. Come down the road. Come on. It's not safe to stay here. Come on.
All right, here he is. All right, my dog is shaking.
I know. Come down here. That's 287 code 33 victim. Fire victim.
Okay.
Come on.
My dog is.
Here.
I know my dog.
I know. Come on.
I'm coming.
Inside the house, authorities found a victim and conditions that the most seasoned members of law enforcement have said they have never seen before. Sullivan's stepson, a 32-year-old man who weighed only 68 pounds. Police say that Sullivan held her stepson captive for 20 years, allegedly since she pulled him out of public school in 2004 when he was barely a teenager. What he has told detectives as he recovers in the hospital is truly disturbing. He has been called in court documents Male Victim 1 or MV1. When he was asked about his earliest memories, MV1 said he would sneak out of his room at night to eat and drink, and when it was discovered he was doing that, he was locked in his room. He recalled drinking from a toilet because he was only getting 2 cups of water a day. Over the years, he was let out of his room less and less. MV1 said he would have to go to the bathroom in a bottle or on newspaper. His life, he says, was so restricted that he relied on listening to NASCAR and University of Connecticut basketball on a radio near his room to know what year it was. The fire that sent his stepmom fleeing from the house was his effort to escape, according to prosecutors. He learned that hand sanitizer was flammable, and he used that, printer paper, and a lighter that he took from his father a year prior to set the flames. He said that Sullivan told him to get up and get out of the house, but also told him to clean his face before he escaped, perhaps worried that firefighters would notice his appearance, almost as if she allegedly didn't think that him being 68 pounds would raise concerns. MV1 says that he laid on the floor of the house as smoke surrounded him because he knew that it would have to be firefighters who would take him out. He told detectives that he started that fire because, quote, I wanted my freedom. We know that MV1's biological dad died in January of last year, and police say he was in a wheelchair. It's unclear yet what MV1 has said about his father's involvement in the alleged abuse. We also know that Sullivan has 2 daughters. Today in court, the judge said that she's currently living with one of them. Today, Sullivan appeared in court to enter a plea on charges including assault in the 1st degree, kidnapping in the 2nd degree, and unlawful restraint in the 1st degree. Her attorney said she is pleading not guilty. The state of Connecticut filed a motion this week to add conditions to her release. They requested house arrest and that she be monitored with a GPS tracking device. The prosecutor said that he spoke with MV1 in the hospital.
This victim is afraid. This victim lives in fear. I introduced myself to the victim, explained who I was. His first question in this fear is, why is she out walking around when I was locked up in a room for 20 years? He is following this on TV and social media, so he is aware of what's happening, and I say that because it would lead to his fear. Based on all that, the state is asking for those conditions.
Sullivan stood alongside her defense attorney, who argued that nothing has changed in this case since they were last in court and bail was set, and she shouldn't be subjected to new conditions.
We're now back seeking to add additional conditions. And I understand that the whole world wants to convict Ms. Sullivan, and the whole world already has. But this is the only place, the only room in this country where we have an opportunity to protect her rights. And as unpopular as that may seem, that's what's at issue here. Her rights, no one else's. When we talk about the constitutional rights in criminal law, they're to protect the accused, regardless of how unpopular it may be. So, Your Honor, I think it would be, respectfully, Your Honor, I think it would be a mistake to add conditions at this time.
Her attorney also talked about the threats that Sullivan has apparently been getting since her arrest.
There are numerous threats against her. Numerous people have made threats. They're posting them online, talking about not waiting to be able to see her out in public. She needs to be able to have freedom of movement, and at times, in fact, Your Honor, I've actually advised her to leave the state initially, given the media attention.
In court, it was also said that Sullivan has gone to a hospital for mental health treatment since her arrest. Outside of court, we heard from MV1's biological mom. She said that she gave MV1 up to her ex-husband, who was married to Kimberly Sullivan, when he was just an infant. Here's part of what she told the media today outside the courthouse about what justice would look like in this case. This video per WFSB TV.
That everybody that was in that household is in prison, in solitary confinement, and they could be fed 2 cups of water a day.
Tracy Vellerand lived only about 20 minutes from the house where police say her son was held captive. She said she looked for MV1 for years but couldn't find him. She says since Sullivan's arrest, she hasn't been able to speak to her son, but has said she loves him and hopes that one day she can have a relationship with her son. Today, the judge decided that Sullivan has to wear a GPS monitoring device, but opted against putting her on house arrest. So she is still walking free after being accused of what the judge called the most troubling allegations he has seen in his career on the bench. He then addressed Sullivan directly.
These are just allegations. You are not guilty. You have the presumption of innocence. You will get a fair trial. The reason I put GPS monitoring on you has nothing to do with you being guilty. It shouldn't be interpreted that way.
Joining us now, once again, as we continue to follow this story out of Connecticut, is crime victims advocate Elizabeth Parker. Thank you for being with us once again here on Law and Crime. I know you watched this hearing today as well. It stands out to me that Kimberly Sullivan is still free. She now has this GPS monitor, but she is still free after what she's been accused of. What do you make of what the judge decided in this hearing today?
Well, I think the judge struggled with the change. There was no change in circumstances. And I think the defense made a very good point that the only change in circumstances over the last 2 weeks since a previous judge had already reviewed the case and listened to the state's argument was that Kimberly Sullivan had been out on bond for 2 weeks and had had no violations, showed up in court on 2 occasions. I thought that was an interesting argument to present. But at the end of the day, I think the judge wanted to ensure the safety of the public and ensure that Kimberly Sullivan does not flee the jurisdiction, that she does come back to court. You know, he pointed out that she was facing some very significant time, and that I think he said, quote, the allegations are arguably the most troubling that he had seen during his tenure as a judge. That was impactful. You know, he followed up by saying, you know, they're just allegations, but if proven to be true, they show a really unthinkable amount of lack of empathy. And so he said she did have some ties to the area, but we're now hearing, and the judge was the one who brought this up, that since the last court date, I guess Kimberly Sullivan has been admitted to the hospital to address certain mental health conditions. And I think the judge felt that those were concerning enough that he needed to put the GPS monitor on her so that she could be monitored at all times and everyone would know where she was.
She's also reportedly saying, so she had 2 adult daughters. She has 2 adult daughters, and there's a question about what alleged role they might have had in these allegations as well. She's the only one, though, Kimberly Sullivan, who's been charged at the time of this reporting, but the judge said that she is living with one of her daughters right now. Why not house arrest in this case? I mean, if you're this judge and you're saying what I'm reading here is the most troubling I've seen in all my years on the bench, why not give the state what they're asking for and have her on house arrest?
Well, I think some of that goes to her lack of any prior criminal arrests, prior criminal charges. There's nothing for the state to base their request upon to say, we have a concern she's not going to show up in court. And the judge did take the defense attorney's argument to heart that there is a presumption of innocence, that at this time, these are just mere allegations. Now, significant, serious allegations where she's facing, as the prosecutor pointed out, life in prison if convicted. They are just allegations, and the purpose of bond is not to punish, but to ensure safety of the public at large and that she show back up in court. And I think the judge took also into consideration that a previous judge looked at the allegations and made this ruling of just releasing her on bond. And the defense attorney was arguing, Judge, if you change these conditions, it's going to send a strong message that you think she's guilty or that there is no presumption of innocence. And I think the judge was kind of trying to, we say split the baby, as King Solomon did in the Bible times, kind of come in the middle and give the state what they wanted, but not give them everything that they wanted. And I think the state was smart in asking for house arrest, but saying we'd also agree to GPS monitoring. The prosecutor pointed out that his first conversation with the victim was extremely impactful, but that the victim's question is, why is she out free? And I was locked up for 20 years. I think that's a very valid question. But
it is. And the prosecutor came right out, and it seemed very procedural what he was saying in the first part of his statement. But then he gets to, we went and talked with male victim 1, and he says, why is she out free when I was locked up for 20 years, which is at the crux of all of these allegations. What stood out to me is how impactful it was just hearing that secondhand. How could that, what does that tell you about how impactful his testimony could be if this eventually goes to trial?
I think his testimony is going to be crucial. How he can explain to the jury that he was affected by this, what torture he lived through on a daily basis, is going to be gut-wrenching. It will be extremely impactful. But by the time we get to trial, we know he's not going to weigh 68 pounds anymore. So he's going to have to take the jury back to those days, back to those years. Every hour that he suffered, he's going to have to walk them through, because they won't see it. They won't see the impact of him sitting there in the witness chair, because I assume by that time he will be a much healthier version of himself. So the photographs from the night that he was rescued, those videos, and hopefully his statement was recorded. That will be all very important to have in support of his testimony.
Turning back to the conversation about bond, because there was a lot of public outcry when it was $300,000 and she posted it and she walked free. And outside of the courtroom, I mean, the public in general does see bond. I think it's a lot of people see it as somewhat of a punishment for the allegations, just publicly, not attorneys. The fact that there was so much outcry, could that have played a role in the judge's decision as well? And for the state this week deciding, let's throw in a motion to try to turn it up a little bit, because outside of the walls of that courtroom, so many people were shocked and frustrated and upset that she was able to walk free after being accused of what she has.
It's interesting because I've been a part of a lot of high-profile cases, and high-profile cases are always different. When the public outcry is for certain things, like in this particular case, how could she be out on bond? The elected officials, and I can't tell you if this judge is elected or if he's appointed, but elected officials always take into consideration what their constituents are saying. District attorneys, elected state attorneys, prosecutors are elected, and they want to make sure that when the public is asking for something and the victim here is asking for something, they want to do right in those situations. And although it appears that they've asked for this before, now, the prosecutor made an interesting argument where he said, listen, Judge, there doesn't have to be a change in circumstances for you to make this decision. You can at any time change or modify the conditions of bail. But let me tell you what's different since we first were in this courtroom. And he proceeded to say many witnesses had come forward. In fact, he proceeded to say that there was a friend of Kimberly Sullivan for 21 years that came forward, made a statement to law enforcement, and said she didn't even know of the existence of a stepson and was never invited into the home. I thought that was an impactful piece of evidence, that maybe the judge tucked away and said, that's new. It doesn't change the circumstances, but it certainly makes the case even stronger. So I do think that elected officials, judiciary, when they're in the public eye and there's a national case where everyone is saying they're so outraged by her release and not being on house arrest or monitored, I think that comes into play. I definitely do.
Now looking at Kimberly Sullivan, because, and we've talked several times since she was first arrested, and originally it's like, what type of person would be accused of this crime? And then you see her in court and you start to piece together who she is based off of conversations. And then now that stood out to me as well. If you're friends with someone for 21 years and they've never talked about having a stepson once, and I'm sure that friend knew she had 2 daughters because those daughters were not allegedly locked up. For you, as just someone who has dealt with criminal defendants throughout your career, and what do you make of Kimberly Sullivan at this point and what we're learning about her?
I think she's trying to get her ducks in a row. I think she's trying to rally the troops, so to speak, and try to figure out how she's going to defend these significant allegations, these overwhelming charges. Certainly, we're seeing that her defense attorney isn't silent. by any stretch of the imagination. He's holding press conferences after every single court hearing. He's trying to get his theory of the case out there, which we're not really quite sure as to what it's going to be. It seems like he's kind of throwing a bunch of balloons up there and see how they play out in the media, which is a certain strategy. But he's going to be hard pressed to if he wanted to change venue or try to say that the media is, influencing this case. He was very much presumption of innocence. Presumption of innocence today is all he kept talking about, and how changing conditions can affect her presumption of innocence. But then he's the one, that continues this conversation every time the media is there. So you can't really have it both ways. But certainly, she seems to be with it. She seems to, be very prepared for court. She looks nice every single time in a different outfit that she's coming to court. The judge mentioned on the record that she's had a job for many years, her last job being at JCPenney, he said on the record. So she's not someone who was not able to live in this daily life, in this world, and interact with people. She seems, by all stretches of the imagination, to the outside as someone who lived a normal life, but had a very, very big evil secret.
Very, very much so, according to these accusations. The defense attorney's interesting because the first time he spoke to the media, it was way more aggressive in terms of the message. I feel the message that he sent was, she's shocked by this. She can't believe she's accused of this. And it was almost this complete discrediting of anything that's being sent her way, where today it was more the defense of the system. And she's, all of you have decided that she's guilty, not, and really didn't go back to what was originally that just blanket defense that she could never be accused of something like this. What do you make of that? I mean, did that stand out to you as well? Somewhat of a difference, and the message seems to be evolving when he approaches the media now.
I agree. Now it's, she's kind of being victimized by the system. And he knows the facts are a really, really difficult thing to get around. And that evidence of the 68 pounds, those videos, all of that is not anything that he's going to be able to maneuver against. So I think he's kind of changing his strategy and realizing, less is more, maybe in this particular situation. And that, his first go round with the media didn't come out favorably for him.
Yeah, it was because now you have people who are challenging the theory that he laid out the first time around, which was she was completely innocent. And then today he won't answer those questions. And it was, well, I don't have to answer those questions because the state's the one who's bringing these accusations. In court, I noticed the state spoke for about 3.5 to 4 minutes. He went from 7 to almost 8 minutes and was way more, and maybe this is just who he is as a personality, he was just way more loud, I guess, in the way that he was talking, the energy that he uses when he spoke. How do you think he approached that argument to say that things shouldn't be changed because bail was already set and nothing's changed over the past 2 weeks?
Well, out of his 7 to 8 minutes, most of it was repetitive, but he is very animated. He's very strategic about what he says, about the words that he uses. He really was trying to, I think, lay a foundation, potentially. Oftentimes you see in these cases that the evidence is overwhelming. So the defense attorney is then trying to lay a foundation for potential appellate issues. Okay, so here I can see, maybe he's trying to say the change in conditions, this judge isn't going to give her a fair trial. That's what he was intimating, that judge, if you do change these conditions, it's going to send a message that the presumption of innocence means nothing in your courtroom. That was pretty strong.
Yeah.
He said that the changing conditions would have a direct and significant impact on her right to a fair trial. I see him setting up an argument for potentially appeal if and when she's convicted, that she never had a fair trial, starting from the conditions of bond, starting from the judge changing these conditions. That sent a message. This was a big media case. The judge, all of these things. So kind of like when you don't have the facts on your side, you try to make and argue procedural issues or set up, the court for some sort of argument. And that's what I see he's trying to do now. He's really kind of shifted gears, like you said.
Yeah, and April 22nd is when she's going to be back in court. Now that she's entered this not guilty plea, what happens next in this case moving forward?
Now what's going to happen is the state will be gathering what they call as their discovery, any reports, videos, evidence. I saw a report that DCF has now looked in their archives and found some additional records. Those may be relevant to the case. So the state's going to gather all of the evidence and share that with the defense attorneys so that they have the ability to start preparing their case for trial and preparing their defense. So that is what's going to happen for the next several months, probably till there's a trial date set. And, it seems like the state has not finished with their investigation as all these witnesses keep coming forward. So as more evidence comes to light, the state will be sharing that with the defense. And then it's either, are we going to go into trial, or is there going to be a resolution of these charges with the victim's input as is required by law?
Yeah, and would you, and it's still so early, but we know that there's the state even saying today that they feel like they have a pretty strong case, and I think a lot of people just in the court of public opinion would agree. How likely is it that this would go to a trial?
It's hard to tell right now. I mean, her attorney's a pretty hard charger, so it really depends on the client. Kimberly Sullivan is the one who's going to drive that bus and that decision. And if she decides she doesn't want to risk it and there's a plea offer that's reasonable, then, maybe she'll consider that. But I can't imagine that this is something where she's going to want to accept multi-years of prison. So it may be something that trial's inevitable. And, a lot of this case is going to be a he said, she said. We don't know what happened behind those closed doors, but for what the victim has stated. So we know that on the day that law enforcement showed up and fire rescue showed up, we know the condition that he was in on that day. But the years and years prior and everything that happened behind closed doors prior to that day, much of that is going to be testimony from him. Sometimes victims in domestic violence cases or victims, they don't want to go through the stress of a trial. And the state does take that into consideration oftentimes when they are extending plea offers or trying to resolve charges in cases. So we'll see. It sounds like he's strong right now, so let's hope that continues.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. It's again, she'll be in court next month, and this story will continue on forward. Elizabeth Parker, it's always so great to have you on Law and Crime as we continue to follow this story. Thank you. Another key part of this story that cannot be overlooked are the questions for the system and how someone seemingly was able to slip through the cracks for 20 years. The Department of Children and Families visited MV1's house twice in 2004 when Sullivan had custody. That was after he was pulled out of public school. The state at the time didn't believe anything was wrong in the house, even though those at his former school in Waterbury had raised concerns. MV1's elementary school principal told WVIT-TV, quote, "Everyone really was concerned with this child since he was 5 years old. You knew something was wrong. It was grossly wrong. We knew it. We reported it. Not a damn thing was done. That's the tragedy of it. It's unclear what the files say about what DCF saw when they went to MB1's house in 2004, because in Connecticut, when a case is considered unfounded, the records are erased after 5 years. This case is due back in court in Connecticut on April 22nd. For On the Case, presented by Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.